Some men are forged in war, molded by the chaos, the pain, the brutality of battle. Others are born for it, as if destiny carved them from steel and fire. This is the true story of one such man, a soldier whose courage bordered on madness, whose body was shattered time and time again, yet who never once gave in. He fought in not one, but 2 world wars. He lost an eye, he lost a hand, he was shot in the stomach, the leg, the face, and still, he returned to the front lines again and again. His name was Sir Adrian Carton de Wiart, a man who defied death so many times. History started to sound like myth, but make no mistake, he was very real, and this is his story.
Adrian Carton de Wiart was born in 1880 in Brussels, Belgium, into a wealthy, aristocratic family with diplomatic ties and noble blood. On paper, he was destined for a life of privilege and politics, the kind of man who might wear worn medals but never earn them in battle. But Adrian was never that kind of man. Even as a teenager, war called to him, not as horror, but as purpose. At just 19 years old, he made a choice that would define everything that followed. He dropped out of Oxford, lied about his age, faked his name, and disguised his nationality, all so he could fight for the British Empire in the Second Boer War in South Africa. He wasn't drafted. He wasn't forced. He wanted to be there, and he was willing to risk his life for the privilege. In the blistering heat of the South African veldt, Adrian Carton de Wiart got his first taste of combat, and he liked it. This wasn't a man who flinched from the sound of gunfire. He leaned into it. He thrived in it. By the time World War I erupted in 1914, Adrian wasn't some idealistic young recruit. He was already a hardened veteran, a soldier by choice, not chance. And that's when the real nightmare began.
World War I wasn't a war. It was a slaughterhouse. Trench warfare turned Europe into a graveyard of mud, rats, gas, and blood. The ground itself swallowed men whole. The air reeked of rot and fear. And yet Adrian Carton de Wiart didn't just endure it, ... He charged into it. While others ducked and hesitated, Adrian led assaults head-on across barbed wire, through machine gun fire, over fields littered with corpses, and the war tried to kill him. Over and over again he was shot in the stomach, then the ankle, the hip, the leg, the ear. Any one of those wounds could have ended a life, but not his. Then came the worst blow. A bullet tore through his face. It shattered his jaw, destroyed his left eye, and ripped away part of his ear. In the hospital, doctors fit him with a glass eye, a small gesture to restore what war had taken. But Adrian didn't care for comfort or vanity. The glass eye annoyed him, so he simply ripped it out himself. Soon after, his hand was hit, so badly mangled the surgeons tried to save it, but he demanded amputation. He told them plainly, take it off. So they did. And before the wounds were fully healed, Adrian returned to the battlefield wearing an eye patch, missing a hand, and with metal still buried in his body. He wasn't just a survivor, he was becoming a symbol, a living embodiment of defiance. Men followed him not just because of his rank, but because even death itself seemed afraid of him. By the time he led a charge at the Somme, dragging his broken body through hell again, Adrian Carton de Wiart had stopped being just a soldier. He had become a legend.
By 1916, World War I had already devoured millions of lives. The Somme offensive would become one of the deadliest battles in human history. Over 1 million casualties in less than 5 months. In the midst of that unthinkable bloodshed was one man charging forward when most men fell back. Adrian Carton de Wiart, battered, bloodied, and half-blind, led not one, but multiple assaults under relentless machine gun fire. He didn't just order his men forward, he went with them. First over the top, first into the chaos. Enemy bullets tore through the air like rain. Shrapnel exploded in every direction. Blood soaked the earth. Adrian was hit again, wounded, bleeding. But when medics tried to evacuate him, he refused. He stayed in the fight. With one eye, one hand, and a body that had been stitched back together too many times to count, Adrian kept leading, shouting through the noise, dragging others with him, showing no fear. Soldiers didn't just respect him, They believed in him. One of his men later said, "He didn't give orders. He inspired madness." Because only someone mad or immortal could survive what he had and keep coming back for more. That same year, in 1916, Adrian Carton de Wiart was awarded the Victoria Cross, the highest honor for bravery in the British Empire, not for a single act of courage, but for a life made of it. But for all the medals, all the wounds, all the scars, Adrian's war wasn't over. Not even close. When the guns finally fell silent in 1918, the world breathed a fragile sigh of relief. The Great War, the war to end all wars, had left nations shattered and families broken. Millions of soldiers went home, some in one piece, most in pain, and all of them praying they'd never see a battlefield again. But not Adrian Carton de Wiart. For him, the war wasn't just duty, it was identity. He belonged in the chaos. So while others tried to forget the trenches, Adrian kept marching forward. In the years that followed, he served in the British campaigns across Eastern Europe, helping fight in Poland and the Baltic region during the chaos of the Russian Civil War. He was wounded again. More scars added to an already battered body. But he didn't stop. He never did. Eventually, he was appointed to prestigious posts, and for a moment, it seemed like this indestructible warrior might finally rest. In the 1930s, after decades of combat, Adrian Carton de Wiart retired to a quieter life. No bombs, no bullets, just silence. But silence never suited him. Because when the 1930s gave rise to something darker, when a man named Adolf Hitler began marching across Europe, spreading fire and fury with each step, the world once again stood on the brink of catastrophe. And once again, it needed warriors. By now, Adrian was in his 60s, half deaf, half blind, missing a hand. Limbs riddled with old wounds. A ghost of a soldier from a war most had already tried to forget. But when his country called, Adrian didn't hesitate. Because warriors don't retire, they rise. By the time World War II erupted in 1939, Adrian Carton de Wiart was no longer a young officer hungry for battle. He was 60 years old, half deaf, one-eyed, one-handed, his body a roadmap of scars from bullets, shrapnel, and surgeries long past, but the fire inside him still burning. So, when the British government needed someone with nerves of steel and a stomach for chaos, they turned to the most unlikely of warriors, a man who should have been long retired. And Adrian Carton de Wiart said yes. He returned to active duty and immediately plunged back into danger. First, he was sent to Norway, helping coordinate the Allied response to Hitler's sudden invasion. Then, he was dispatched to Yugoslavia, a region teetering on the edge of collapse. Then to the Middle East, where colonial tension and Nazi influence collided like dry tinder and flame. Everywhere he went, Adrian brought his signature combination of grit, blunt honesty, and quiet defiance. He was more than a soldier now. He was a symbol, a myth in uniform. But in 1941, fate took another violent turn. While flying to a secret diplomatic meeting in North Africa, his aircraft lost control and crashed off the coast of Italian-occupied Libya. Most men in their 60s, missing an eye and a hand, would not survive a plane crash into open water, but Adrian did. Bruised, battered, and soaked in fuel, he pulled himself from the wreckage and swam through rough waves to the shoreline, only to be met by enemy soldiers. He was captured by Italian forces and taken prisoner. At 61 years old, Adrian Carton de Wiart, war hero, survivor of 1,000 wounds, became a POW behind enemy lines. But if the Italians thought age would break him, they had no idea who they were dealing with. Even behind enemy lines, Adrian refused to play the victim. He attempted escape not once, not twice, but 5 times. He dug tunnels, he climbed walls. He even broke into a house to steal civilian clothes. Eventually, the Italians gave up trying to break him and released him as part of a diplomatic exchange. The man was impossible to keep down. For most men, becoming a prisoner of war, especially at the age of 61, would mark the end of the fight. A final, bitter chapter. But for Adrian Carton de Wiart, it was just another battlefield. He was captured by the Italians in 1941. After surviving a plane crash and swimming to shore with a broken back, multiple injuries, and his body already worn from decades of war. They imprisoned him at the Vincigliata Castle, a medieval fortress converted into a POW camp for high-ranking Allied officers, a place the Italians believed was escape-proof. They underestimated their guest. Adrian didn't just accept captivity. He fought it with the same ferocity he showed in the trenches. Over the next 2 years, he became a living nightmare for his captors, attempting escape not once, not twice, but 5 times. He tried climbing the castle walls. He tried digging tunnels. He attempted to saw through bars with makeshift tools. He even feigned illness to create a distraction. On one occasion, he and fellow POWs spent months digging a tunnel by hand, hiding the dirt in secret compartments and hollowed-out furniture. When the tunnel was finally complete, they broke out under the cover of night, only to be caught just miles from freedom. But Adrian wasn't discouraged. He laughed, recovered, and planned the next attempt. To the guards, he became a legend. A one-eyed, one-handed, escape-obsessed warrior who never seemed to age, tire, or surrender. Eventually, even his enemies began to admire him. They offered him better treatment. He refused. He didn't want comfort. He wanted out. In 1943, as the tides of war shifted and Italy collapsed from within, Adrian Carton de Wiart was finally released. Not because he gave in, but because the world around him broke before he did. And just like that, the war-hardened prisoner walked free and stepped right back into duty. After 2 world wars, dozens of wounds, 5 escape attempts, and 60 years in uniform, you'd think Adrian Carton de Wiart would finally lay down his weapons. But even after his release from the Italian POW camp in 1943, he still had more to give. He was immediately assigned to one of the most delicate diplomatic missions of the war. Flown to China as Winston Churchill's personal representative to Chiang Kai-shek, from the trenches of Europe to the corridors of power in Asia, Adrian, now in his 60s, became a voice of experience, a man who had literally seen it all. His war wounds had never slowed him. Not the missing hand, not the lost eye, not the deafness, the limp, or the pain. He was a relic from a vanished era, part warrior, part myth. Finally, in 1947, he retired for good. He was 67 years old. He settled in Ireland, bought a house by the sea, and, for the first time, lived in peace. He wrote a memoir, simply titled Happy Odyssey. In it, he barely mentioned his injuries. Not out of modesty, but because he never saw them as obstacles. To him, pain was part of the job, and courage was just common sense. Adrian Carton de Wiart died in 1963, at the age of 83. He fought in the Boer War, the First World War, and the Second World War. He was shot in the face, head, stomach, ankle, leg, hip, and ear. He escaped from POW camps. He crashed in planes. He buried friends and watched empires fall. And through it all, he never complained. He once said, "Frankly, I enjoyed the war." Adrian Carton de Wiart wasn't just a soldier. He was war in human form.